from the delegation of the European Union to Ukraine, and we have also experts here. We propose 7 minutes for every speech, so that we have time for questions and answers session. I would like to make some says from the whole coalition. Then Mr. Johannes Baur is invited to speak, and colleagues as well on the sectors. Please show us the presentation on the screen. Thank you. What we would like to talk about in our main conclusions: implementation of the association agreement continues. The process is ongoing, although the pace is not high, and in some sectors we see some procrastination of 2 years on average. Platform of balancing platform was delayed. Modernization of subsidies, it was also delayed for 2 years. There is a question whether the electricity market will start operation from July 1st this year. The year of 2019 is quite complicated because we have presidential and parliamentary elections, so it is hard to forecast what staff pool we will have in future, who will be decision makers. Also, the gas contract finishes this year, and there is a huge task to shape the new format for next years, and there is questions to Naftogaz unbundling. What recommendations we would like to pronounce for all players? As a result of monitoring, we found that procedures of secondary legislation adoption are very complicated. There are many primary laws adopted, but in the cabinet of ministers, the complex tasks and decisions, they are delayed always. Our proposal is about administrative reform, how to simplify the decision adoption inside the cabinet. The next question is the reporting should be improved. The government, of course, report on the association agreement obligations implementation. The achievements are reported, but those issues which are delayed or not fulfilled, they are not reported. So the issues which have not been fulfilled by ministries, they also should be reported. There is the next recommendation for many years: the better coordination of efforts between the ministries should be in place. Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Environment, State SAEE. The better work should be demonstrated with our consumers. We understand that the complex reforms in the energy sector, they are painful sometimes, and the more complicated the reform, the more painful it is on vulnerable consumers, the more explanations needed for the population. We here carry out the expert discussion on the agreement of the association. I am giving the floor to Mr. Johannes Baur, Head of Operations Section 3, Economic Cooperation, Energy, Infrastructure and Environment of the Delegation of the European Union to Ukraine.
Thank you very much, and thank you also for your work on this report and this important analysis, which I think is important for the Ukrainian public to have also an independent view on what has been done in the energy sector, which remains, of course, a key part the implementation of the association agreement, and the reform of the energy sector, as you said, is ongoing, and still a lot has to be done. So thank you very much for this, and also for the opportunity to give our own view on this. We are publishing every year a report on the implementation of the association agreement, but that is not very detailed. It covers all the areas of the agreement, and so it is not very detailed. So this report is also a welcome opportunity to look a little bit more in detail on it. Briefly, from our side, I think we share your judgment that indeed, of course, since Maidan, a lot has been done in the energy sector, but we see a slowdown of reforms in the past years, and that indeed there's still a lot to be done, both on the governmental side, but also on the radar side. In the past year, I think there were some positive developments. So the National Energy Regulator has been made at least functional with the appointment of new commissioners. That is certainly positive, although the regulator is still not complete. The leadership is not yet complete, and this is certainly an issue which needs urgent solution. Last year also the law on EITI was adopted by the Rada, certainly very much welcome to improve and increase the transparency reporting requirements in the oil and gas extraction sector. So these are a few positive developments. I would add also energy efficiency. There has been a lot of work done on the implementation of the energy efficiency laws adopted in 2016. The secondary legislation has been developed, so certainly there's also progress. The Energy Efficiency Fund has been established and should be operational now this year, this summer, to finally give benefits to Ukrainian citizens with support activities. On the other side, of course, we see that in the gas sector, important reforms are still blocked. We are still waiting for the unbundling of Naftogaz, which is a key issue and which is very much delayed. There has been some work done also on that, but in view of the need to establish an independent transmission system operator operating the pipelines on the 1st of January 2020, to have an independent TSO which is ready to take over also a new transit contract. This is really essential, and there are some urgent measures have to be taken. For that, of course, we need a functioning Naftogaz. To prepare that, we need a functioning MGU and also the support of the government to that. On the electricity sector, the law on the electricity market has been adopted 2 years ago. It foresees the market opening on the 1st of July, and from our side and also from the side of other international donors, there are a number of questions from our side whether the Ukrainian side is really ready to implement. What we would not like to see is, of course, that this electricity sector reform, which is very important and which is also very much supported by us, is discredited by a bad implementation or by an implementation which is not ready. We see currently in the East big problems with increasing debts, not only in the eastern part, but we see increasing debts in the electricity sector, and that is definitely an issue which needs to be urgently addressed. there's a need in the new electricity market to protect vulnerable consumers, which is a requirement also under EU legislation, and the third energy package. And we have not yet seen the proposals for that, how to do that, and this becomes also, I think, very, very urgent. On the renewable side, we follow the development of the new renewables auctions law. We have made several comments. In principle, we support this transition to an auction system so that renewables remain attractive also for foreign investors. But the system has to be changed. I think that is there's a large agreement on that now, and now we hope that also the final adoption will take place soon, and in a way that this auctioning system can be implemented according to best European practices. Finally, a word on nuclear issues. The nuclear regulator, we are also very much concerned about the independence of this regulator, which is not yet established. There's a draft law in the Rada sitting for months and years now. And this is also certainly an issue which is on the top of our agenda, because to regulate the very important nuclear sector in Ukraine, there has to be a fully independent regulator in line with European practice, but also in line with the international requirements. Unfortunately, in that area, we also do not see a lot of progress. So there's also something to do. I think this is my introductory statement. In total, there's a lot of urgent issues also to be addressed, especially in the gas sector. We are, of course, aware about the situation now with the presidential elections, with the parliamentary elections. But Ukraine needs to take some urgent decisions in order to be ready and not to be accused of having failed to do some things and to be which can be used by the Russian side in order not to go for a further transit contract. This is really a key concern of us and something very important.
Дуже дякую, Johannes. Отже,
Thank you, Mr. Johannes Baur. This was a message from the European delegation not to slow down the reforms despite of complexity. Now we are giving the floor to our experts so that they brief us about every sector. First, Svitlana Golikova, independent expert on electricity energy as concerns the topic of this briefing today. Good afternoon. As Ms. Olena said, not only electricity consumers but also our voters, we should do everything for these people, for consumers, so that their life standards be improved. And in the context of this year's monitoring and last year's monitoring, I would like to voice out several phases. What we focused on. Of course, there are some positive progress in the introduction of the new electricity market. This concerns, first of all, the regulatory framework, which was improved last year, the rules of the market, the codes, all market players, excluding traders or OSPs, they will have the first priority on the market, and retail market started operations. Unfortunately, the decisions were in December, and the launch of this market we cannot name successful because both the consumers and the market players, they were not ready. But now the time helps these market players and they learn how to operate on this market. Unfortunately, we need to prevent failure, so we should study the possibility how to launch wholesale market correctly, learning the lessons of retail market. First of all, as it has already been said today, the new regulator should be shaped. There is 1 year of its operation, but its composition is not full. Only 5 members are there. 2 members are not in the position. I am a secretary of the Competition Commission. The competition is blocked, unfortunately, by the ex-head of the national regulator and the head of the department, so we cannot continue with the competition. May 7th will be the next court sitting in this case. Mr. Wolf against the Competition Commission. So 1 year delay was due to the court proceedings. This was not because of the Commission, but because of the plaintiffs. The unbundling of Oblenergos took place. It was quite formal to some extent, but it is in operation already. In the process of corporatization, we can see Ukrenergo, and we think that the certification will be finalized this year, and we have supply of universal services. Ukrenergo, I think that you know that yesterday there was the news. The cabinet reported that the market operator and guaranteed consumer on the basis of state enterprise Energorynak was established for the balancing market, and the day-ahead market we also have a positive progress. As concerns this year, what is planned for this year? What should be done? What are the next steps? First of all, my colleagues have already said that there is no good coordination. Coordination is lacking, so coordination center of the cabinet stopped operations in April last year. For 1 year it has not been in operation, so there was a lack of coordination, which is needed to make reforms high quality ones. The other question is debts. Mr. Baur said already the issue is that nearly 30 billions hryvnias owed to state enterprise Energorynak. 30 billions include 1 billion of debts in the east. So this is not only supplied to the occupied territories which are not under control and Crimea, they are current debts by water utilities, Pasnyansky Vodokanal, and mines. As concerns mines, we have never talked about, although it is available in the report, but we didn't discuss this publicly, that it is a condition of association agreement, supply of high quality coal and restructuring of our coal industry. We can say that there is a dramatically critical situation here because the structure change has not been implemented in the coal sector, and supply of coal to our thermal power plants does not comply with the requirements which are set for the new market, both in price and quality. There is a problem in nuclear sector as concerns the directives on safety. Not all regulations have been adopted on the nuclear sector. This is not the primary laws but secondary laws which are still waiting. As concerns the introduction of the new market, in reality, we need regulations which should have been adopted last year, at least 6 months before, for some piloting phase, or at least in April this year, so that the wholesale market started operations in testing regime, but there is no IT platform completed in full and no regulations for bilateral contracts on commercial metering and so on and so forth. There are concerns, deep concerns how it will happen on July 1st. But I'd like to say that this long run, now we are near the finish, and only those who have forces, they can finish. So now we have this leap jump before the finish. Now this is our period we experience today, and there are concerns that this market will not operate in full. Ilya Polulach will also tell about this if you have questions. Thank you, Ms. Svitlana. First, the experts will present their positions. So the key priorities, DiXi Group, Roman Nitsovych. The first event which all household consumers experienced, and it is a change of the regulations on special powers, which sets the procedure of selling gas and regulated prices. In principle, it is possible that there were steps to approximate this price to the cost basis, but there are negative also things that it was linked to the summer prices last year, and there is a discussion between Naftogaz and the government concerning this formula, because it is not flexible and it gives voluntary power to the Cabinet of Ministers, and the Cabinet of Ministers may think not about market but about politics in decision making. And this formula could be a little bit of negative effect, and it does not help us to achieve competitiveness and opportunity for consumers to make choice of suppliers. And balancing on gas market was delayed 3 times. Now it is in operation, but there are some technical unregulated issues, but it is good that the process now is in operation, and it gives gas transportation system and distribution system operators to reduce the expenses which contributed to the deaths, and they can be more flexible in addressing their consumers. And the codes of networks and tariff methodologies were changed thanks to Secretariat contribution of the energy community. As concerns recent changes in the corporate management of Naftogaz, these steps are seen as steps back. In some circumstances, they can issue voluntary decisions which are bounding, and this is seen as a political intervention, potential political interventions, which does not comply with the legislation. Talking about unbundling, as Ms. Johannes Baur says, this process is been discussed, and unbundling by ownership is now established, but Naftogaz pursues all the discussion participants that the optimal model is ICO, where the operator remains in the structure of ownership of Naftogaz. And they say as arguments the new arbitration on the transit contracts and some obligations which Naftogaz bear on supply. And as to this vision, some documents have been developed on transfer of the rights from Ukrtransgaz to Magistralny Gazoprovody of Ukraine, and the affiliates in the structure of Ukrtransgaz. These affiliates were established. As to the security of supply, we efficiently used in March 2019 the mechanism of early warning, when 6 days before we had the situation, extraordinary situation, when gas in 2018, March 2018, the company didn't want to comply with the requirements, so we conducted training. This training helped to establish better security rules and actions if the situation is extraordinary. This gives a legislative basis to be ready for gas crisis if it happens because of the Russian side, and Trilateral, and if Trilateral negotiations will not bring us positive results, we should be ready to extraordinary situations. And this talking about special obligations which were imposed for the Cabinet of Ministers not to change prices in manual mode. There should be some transparent benchmarks for these prices set. First, previously it was import parity, now it is market price. This should be changed, and obstacles should be removed so that consumers choose suppliers, and independent status of the regulator should remain, and the National Commission is responsible for further regulation in the market, including there are regulations of the European Union which we should observe. In autumn, the energy community took decisions this year. We wait for the annex to the association agreement to be changed and supplemented. Talking about unbundling, a final decision is needed as to its model, how this process will go, and political will is needed, political support needed. This is a global process. This is not only government which is involved. Whatever the model will be, some regulations are needed and adopted by the Cabinet of Ministers. The certification process should be launched, and we have lack of time. We should work faster. Talking about the energy security, trilateral negotiations give the we do not know the position of the Russian party. It is complicated to forecast the result of negotiations, but whatever the result will be, the first we should be ready to winter season. Maybe we should have more reserves of gas than we had this year. We should organize purchases now. Then we should shape the consolidated position to be ready to every round of negotiations and to do all our, let's say, home tasks, so that there are no arguments which Russian party can have. Thank you. Now, Mr. Gennadiy Ryabtsev, you are welcome. Thank you. Reforms or the repair in the oil sector goes more slower than in other sectors. This is the third year where the implementation report of the energy community says so. Ukraine took obligations in the association agreement and in the contract on accession to the energy community. All these obligations are delayed very much. Even we do not comply with the Cabinet of Ministers plans, where priority tasks are set, not talking about the mid-term plan of the government. We cannot say that nothing is implemented. 2018, in contrary to the previous years, it was marked with some positive progress in implementation of Ukrainian obligations in the oil sector. First of all, the law was adopted which simplified the use of oil deposits. The procedure was simplified on using the geological information, and this geological information was digitalized and made open. And also there was an experiment planned for 2019 on electronic auctions, selling special permits for the use of subsoil. And also I would like to mention the positive programs in the regulation of petroleum product market, ensuring of quality of motor fuel. These changes which happened, which were introduced to the tax code, and ensuring implementation of the state budget law for 2019. They concern licensing, introduction, production and the imports of petroleum products, and more control over aviation fuel, aviation gasoline, and also another obligation Ukraine has to replace the share of conventional fuel, petroleum products, with renewables. So excise duties on electromobiles, electric cars, and also import duty on their importation to Ukraine. I'd like to say that the changes are slow, because all this it should have been done 2 or 3 years or even 5 years before. It is enough to say that out of these 81 regulatory acts which are needed and which should be developed, and the government named them priority acts. Only 38 of them have been adopted, and the periods for compliance with obligations, they periodically, they from time to time are postponed, but this is not grounded. In the next period, there are no resources provided to the obligations implementation, so each next period more and more tasks to be implemented. This concerns that every year we should have more and more tasks which have not been fulfilled and should be fulfilled now, and continuously the new draft subsoil code adoption was always postponed, as well as the monitoring system of quality and the standard of motor fuel. Also, it is always proposed, and as well as the system of transportation and implementation of and sales of motor fuel emissions from various reservoirs. It has been postponed. All these documents, which are focused on the implementation of the directive on creation of minimum reserves of oil and petroleum products, if not initiatives of specific management of, for example, state company Держreserve, we wouldn't have even those progress, those draft laws which we have now on approval of the relevant model and the draft law on creating minimum reserves of petroleum products which we have now. I'd like to mention that there is a set specific feature which characterizes the procedure of drafting regulations. They are always violated. Very many documents are adopted formally. About the approval, it is published. The information about this was published at the governmental website, but then we get to know that it has not been published formally and it has not been finalized yet. For example, one of the documents aimed at improving the procedure of holding electronic auctions, selling special permits for subsoil use. It was formally should have been published in December last year, but it was found that at the end of February this year, the state regulatory service refused this draft because it is not in compliance with the state regulatory policy basics of Ukraine. So it is not surprising that the implementation report of the Secretariat of the Energy Community says that Ukrainian oil and gas sector needs fast changes and Ukraine should become fast in implementing its obligations in this sector. We think that if the public independent experts will continue to press on the government also through such projects as ours, these changes will become inevitable.
Сектор це
Next sector, ecology and renewable energy. And we'd like to have Skype connection. Our expert, Nataliya Andrusevych, Analytical Center, Society and Environment. Natalia, hi. Do you hear us? Yes, I do. Greetings from Kiev to you. She is in Lviv now. So please tell us about the key achievements and priorities for this year in the sphere of environment. Thank you. When we are speaking about progress in the sector, it is worth noting big political support in the implementation of reforms at the beginning of this year. Ecological issues are at the top of the agenda. And so the sound is really bad. We have technical problems. We will try to do it without video, only soundtrack. Please continue. Thank you. When we are speaking about 2018-2019, it is worth noting, first of all, to speak about strategic strategy that was updated. And there are special indicators, and they will be actual until 2030. And it will improve monitoring. Next, what I wanted to say is practical implementation of legislation, assessment of environmental impact and strategic environmental assessment. Yes, there are a number of problems, but this reform is being implemented. This is really important because this implementation is really needed at the national and local level. Also, so the sound is really bad. So these issues need resolution and reforms. About renewable energy, there are positive steps. There are auctions, increase of capacity, and also a lot of work is ahead, and it is really needed for environmental sector. Natalia, I'm sorry, we cannot hear you properly. Please reduce your speech to key elements, because the sound is really, really bad. Okay, now about priorities. What priorities we see? So, improvement of financing to reduce emissions from big combustion installations, and this we see that only working group was created, and there were no proper documents in this area and no proper implementation. Second, what I want to say, those directives that have provisions on those countries that are not the EU members. So mechanisms are needed, and there should be proper dialogue. This is in the sphere of pollution. And about renewable energy, there is creation of auctions, green auctions. Thank you, Natalia. Please stay with us. And then we will have a Q&A session. Now the floor is given to Tetyana Boyko, Sector of Energy Efficiency. about the systemic reform of warming, discrete warming. So several days ago, they published the results of sociological survey, and one of the main expectations, 40% of Ukrainians expect from the president of Ukraine to decrease tariffs. I believe that this issue can be reformulated. People want not the decrease of tariffs themselves, but to have lower bills. No matter what political situation is, all citizens, they want this energy efficiency. In order to have this national idea of energy efficiency that will unite everyone, and people won't have questions why they need it. They shouldn't search for guilty. They just should understand their own role in this process. But of course, without the fact that the conditions should be created by the state, otherwise there won't be any energy efficiency. And in this way, the bills can be decreased. So in the sphere of energy efficiency, we may make a comparison. When people rent a flat, for example, and in their flat there are some repair works, and there are capital repairs. Sanitary equipment is replaced, for example, and there are many right things done. But at the same time, people rent the flat, they pay a lot of money, the price at the market rose, for example, and they see that they have big discomfort, but because they cannot go to their own flat. And I would like to remind to you, and I would like to remind this to myself, and I do it from time to time, about some good things, about major changes that happened during last year in our sector. First, Energy Efficiency Fund was created, and Supervisory Board started its work. That was formed in a transparent way, and I believe that the majority of people who are there, they are highly respected, they are trusted by civil society. So there was institutionalization of Energy Efficiency Fund, and this institution will accumulate big sums from international donors, from the state budget, and it should become a financial instrument, and people will be able to get money from this fund. Second important thing is the introduction of energy certification of buildings, and the first buildings got their ecological certificates, and also there is large-scale training for auditors. They study at educational institutions, and there are practical results. Also, a big thing is practical implementation of the law on energy service contracts, and during previous years legislative framework was established, and now we see real results. In 2018, for example, they concluded 10 times more contracts in energy servicing, 193. Now we have more than 200 for the sum of 190 million hryvnias. And for me, it is really pleasant, because this is not only in budgetary buildings. And the directive says that public buildings should become example, and energy management is introduced in the majority of towns and regions and amalgamated communities, and ESCO system is introduced and work in the housing sector. So these are real practical results that can be seen by people. both members of territorial communities in the public housing buildings and also in multi-storied buildings. And also really big thing, we may compare it, for example, with crashing some concrete wall. So this, we did a preparatory work in order to introduce monetization of subsidies. And it should had to be introduced 1st January 2019, and it was introduced in February, and and a lot of work has been done in order to do this. And now what should we do in 2019? Maybe I will start with subsidies, because this is a fundamental thing. And I have a big fear that we may lose this reform, that there will be some delays in this reform, because current provision provides that it should be done in 3 months, and I believe that when election campaign ends, this program may be stopped, this monetization. And tomorrow I will attend a meeting with Mr. Revan, and we will discuss a new provision, a new mechanism, and it should appear until 1st of May this year. And we will insist on monetization that should be unified. Money should be provided to people, because today we have 2 parallel algorithms for those people who have the right for subsidy until and for those for whom subsidy was appointed before 2019, and for those who have subsidy after 2019. We should have proper option to provide this monetization, and the market and the providers of the service, they should understand how to work and how to collect this bills. So I'm not speaking about collector companies. We should just explain to people how to deal with these issues, how to understand what is in the bills, and to provide information why such tariffs are provided, why these sums are in the bills. So people should understand this, and others should recognize their faults. So we should preserve this reform, and we should have this option to provide money to people. And I believe that we will see it until 1st of May, and this new provision should be adopted. Also we should launch a practical work of energy efficiency fund. As I've said, a supervisory board was formed this year. They selected pilot projects, first projects of this fund, and for these projects they carried out energy audits, and these projects should be launched, and real projects should be implemented in multi-storied buildings, and also it should be replicated for everyone to see real products of this fund for everyone, not just for 15 multi-storied buildings. Nevertheless, warm credits program should continue, and for multi-storied and small buildings, and it should help the work of Energy Efficiency Fund, and all legislative basis was adopted for the law for commercial metering of heating and water. And people usually speak about the laws, but we should have proper bylaws and implementation. And you know that, for example, there is a law, there is a bylaw, but it doesn't work. And on the 1st of May, a new law will be entered on communal services. And I mean, the models that are described in law on commercial metering, how these meters should be set, because going back to repair works, so if there are no metering devices, it won't work. So now 73% are provided with meter devices, but it's not enough, and we should continue our work in order to establish proper mechanisms in order to implement those mechanisms. And people, they should mount these devices for at their own expense, or enterprises, the operators of the network should do it. And also one more fundamental important thing. We should adopt the law on energy efficiency of the buildings. That is the implementation of Directive 27. And a lot has been said about it. And we hoped to adopt it last year, but this text will be discussed in the parliament, but unfortunately there is no proper position, there is no registered draft law at the Supreme Council. Now it is in the central bodies of executive power. These are the plans, these are expectations for the next year.
Thank you. Now I propose to stop our presentations because Mr. Baur should leave in 5 or 10 minutes. Maybe someone have questions to Mr. Baur. Your question, you're welcome.
In order to avoid misunderstanding during possible misunderstanding during interpretation, I will speak in English to be short. I would like to draw your attention to the presentation by Madame Andrusevych, which in fact is much more richer than that what was presented here. And to say one important thing. There is a situation which was presented by Andrusevych in this hall a couple of months ago, together with Minister of Environment, that during approximation supported by EU through some projects, approximation goes through the way of some approximating words, but not sense of European some legislation in environment field. And unfortunately, delegation doesn't want to go into discussion about this for some reasons. And I would like to draw your attention to this fact that in Ukrainian environmental community, it is very well known fact. When minister personally is much more interested in the substance, while representatives of EU project are more interested in the form of EU approximation in the field of environment. It is interesting discussion which I have no time now, but I would like to draw your attention that this issue exists. And if you ask me, Madame Andrusevych, she will tell you more details. If you would like to know more details, I could add something. My name is Andrei Demedenko, and I represent one of environment organization in Ukraine. That's it for the time being. If you will have an interest, I could go much more further to the substance, not just words and forms. Thank you.
Дякую дуже. Чи є в когось ще питання або коментарі? Будь ласка.
Are there any comments, other comments or questions? Can you ask something, not comment? The tech company Verbitska, I will tell you. Last year, the European delegation to Ukraine spent 2.2 billion euros for the projects of support to Fuel and Energy Ministry on development of national plan support. This is critical and priority problems which Ms. Natalia said about the project finished last year, but any scheme or vision of financing of national plan on emission reduction in Ukraine is not available, and there is no report on the completed works. The experts worked for the whole year and also took part in the work group meetings. Can you comment on this, why it happened so? Whether we can expect a financing scheme and whether lessons learned will be taken into consideration.
On this specific issue, it is rather complicated issue. This question of financing. In our view, of course, the companies involved have to contribute also, because it should be also in their interest. As you know, we are also supporting the introduction of state aid reforms in Ukraine. This is a process which will take some time, which has only started last year or 2 years ago with the adoption of the relevant law, and it will take some time to find the way to implement it in Ukraine. It is a complicated issue, but certainly a very important one. And all this support which could be given by the state to the restructuring, of course, has to be in line with state aid guidelines. So I think that is what I can say for that. And indeed, there's some further work is needed, and what has been done by the project is not yet sufficient. But of course, the initiative has to come from the government, from the ministry, or from the two ministries involved together with AMCO.
Дякую дуже. Дозвольте ми тепер
Thank you very much. We would like to give the floor to Oleksandra Gumeniuk, our next speaker on business climate. Dear guests, thank you for your speeches. I would like to speak in 3 blocks. The first concerns governmental support, the second concerns public procurement at ProZorro, and bettering of investment attraction to Ukraine as concerns the state government, the government support to business sector. The law on state support was adopted last year. According to this law, any governmental or municipal stimulation to specific business sector, some tax privileges, they should be agreed with the Anti-Monopoly Committee of Ukraine as of today. The works that have been completed, they concern revision of the relevant support schemes. The website for governmental support has been established. Any NGOs or public members can see and monitor all types of governmental support provided, and also the legislation has been drafted and as well as regulations for the full launch of this regulatory procedure. As concerns ProZorro procurement, you can see how procurement is conducted via internet. Technically, the procedure has been approved almost every day, and the users of ProZorro system can see how the time reduces to search for this or that advertisement by type of product which procurement is needed, and other factors, so the operations are fast and improvements are fast, and risk indicators are in place already, and online privatization has been launched as to small privatization facilities up to 250 million hryvnias worth, and on March the special permits for subsoil use sale started. It was launched. The first auctions in March were the prices increased by 395% within one auction round. This is very positive developments for Ukrainian market as concerns improvement of business climate and investment interaction in Ukraine. Many things could be said. I would like to stress that many things also are mentioned in our brochure, and the brochure also contains a list of legislative and regulatory acts. I would like to briefly tell you that the Customs Service of Ukraine launched one window procedures at customs and the unified account for customs duties payments. This pilot project as of today demonstrate 4 billion hryvnias on account for customs duties via this one window technology, and this procedure will be used further and will be the one a single method in Ukraine because it has proved to be efficient. Also the portal was launched for forecasting and tracing the regulatory bodies activities, where all companies can see the plan of audits and know when they will be audited and ensure that the leaders and relevant staff are on site at the time of audit. If previously all foreign exchange came to the accounts of company and 50% should have been exchanged to hryvnias, now 30% should be exchanged. The rest can remain in the foreign currency in which they were received. So everything as concerns foreign exchange regulation is also present in our manual, which you can see in my hands. Priorities. They are divided into groups. As concerned the ProZorro sales, much work on integration of information systems with international systems is ahead of us, so much room for improvement is here. In future, not only representatives of resident companies but also non-resident companies can take should have opportunity to use ProZorro sales. Now it is not so, and the electronic complaints procedure should also be launched. The next priority for 2019 should be identifying criteria for state support eligibility, the draft, the procedure on information on informing final consumers of energy should be developed, and the mechanism for this information communication should be developed. And the fourth step, how Ms. Andrusevych already said, the good indicator last year was the first reading of the draft law on auctions for renewables in Ukraine. At the beginning of May this year, we wait for the next reading of this draft law, and everyone hopes the law would be adopted, but there are some risks as to the energy system of Ukraine on adoption of the renewables, on their connection to the grid, because the grid needs modernization so that more flexibility is ensured, and modernization and investments are needed for this modernization so that renewable facilities are connected to the grid. Thank you very much. Our report will be available at the website www.nref.org, and we have also printed copies. Now questions. Thank you. Kolenko, strategy 21st. I would like to stress the professionalism of this team which represents this report today. I have two questions. I'd like to mention that you thoroughly studied the fulfillment of every issue by Ukraine of the association agreement. I have questions on the electricity sector and gas sector. You know that the association agreement contains clauses which are very important, especially as concerns that both parties should take consideration of energy grids and their other parties' capabilities while shaping the plans, the strategies of electricity and gas network development, whether these clauses were considered in the report, how they are presented in the report, and whether we do enough in fulfilling these clauses. The second question, I agree to the assessment of the work group that there are huge threats to energy security of Ukraine, which we already feel. We felt them last year and we experienced this year. What results we can expect of the Trilateral group? Maybe we should not only expect but do something. We should act. I would like to ask about the opinion of the work group on the introduction of the early warning mechanism launch. Or we should wait for something, expect something. I understand that the early stage now, that the crisis of energy supply is potentially possible in Ukraine and Europe in future, because the situation and trends are already seen. I will give the floor to Ms. Svitlana and then to Mr. Roman. I will be fast. Thank you for your questions. I thought you would ask something like this because I know your professional approach and sphere. As concerns the development of the network, we analyze this 714 and 89 regulations. This information is available in our report. The Ukrenergo network operator, it cooperates in the NSE project, so of course, Ukrainian networks, the development plans are coordinated with NSE development. As to electricity networks development in the east of Ukraine, so in the east, this is not requirement. This is requirement of our national legislation as to the security of supply, but not international requirements. So here, there is an opportunity to develop the networks there in the projects primarily on Lugansk region and partly on Donetsk region. Mr. Roman, you are welcome. As concerns early warning mechanism, it could be enacted when there is some crisis with supply. Yes, on the Ukrainian side should be monitoring in place, so the early warning mechanism is launched in time. and European Union also should develop plans for potential such emergency situations of crisis with supply, and there are some measures that could already be implemented to prevent or mitigate potential crisis situations. Thank you. Do we have time for one more question? Do we have one question? No questions. Very fast. Okay, one question, please. Thank you, Asachi Federation of Trade Unions of Ukraine. And I have a question to Ms. Boyko. You said that the Energy Efficiency Fund has been established. I want to hear more details from you. What do you mean? This fund has nearly 2 billion hryvnias allocated in the budget of Ukraine. How the staff of the fund is funded, how much money will be spent for the staff of this fund, and how in future the expenditures for this fund will look like. Unfortunately, I do not have answers to these questions because the Energy Efficiency Fund since 2017 traditionally was allocated in money from the national budget, which have not been used. So Olga Belkova, NLP, she introduced the addendum to the change that the allocations are limited in future for the Energy Efficiency Fund. Now only staff salaries are paid and nothing else is done. So in the conditions when the warm loan program all these last years was underfunded, the government transferred money not in time and in very small amount. Our international partners do not like this because there is agreement how much money Ukraine contributes, the same amount international partners would contribute to this program. For 5 years, this Energy Efficiency Fund has been in the process of establishment, and it is too long. Registration and regulations have been developed for 5 years. Verkhovna Rada have not adopted all the documents so far. My forecast is that the project's implementation will start. Vice Prime Minister said that it would be in the first quarter this year, but I forecast it will start, pilot projects will start from July 1st. I would say that if we have at least 2 pilots by the end of this year, it would be good results. Thank you, Ms. Tetyana. So I think here all of us would agree that despite of our movement, we should keep pace. We should address complex issues, and the implementation of legislation gives rise to many questions. So we should continue our monitoring so that every time we see clearly those issues in which civil society should press or cooperate with the government, so that the reports continue moving forward. Thank you for coming to our briefing, to your questions. We are glad to be in contact with you, so you can also address your questions to DiXi Group and to the coalition. Thank you and goodbye.